I would say that, and this is where we'll get to one of the other demons, one of the easiest paths to temptation, and one of the easiest ways a person can fall off the righteous path, is to not recognize that as a human, they are wretched and they are flawed, and that is okay. All humans sin. What is critical is that you do not glorify the sin. Sin is a part of life, but there is a huge difference between saying, I am engaging in this sin, I recognize it as sin, I recognize it is something I should have some shame for, but I also recognize that I am human and thus a sinner, right? But if you then say, no, actually the sports are a good thing. I am a good person for being good at sports. I am a good person for in whatever particular aspect of Slaaneshdom that I engage in. That is where true evil comes from. But true evil can also come from a human that thinks they can totally avoid sin. Every group I know of believes that humans can completely avoid sin. The humans in their group that quote unquote come closest to that are typically least efficacious individuals in society, because avoiding sin means avoiding action.
Would you like to know more?
When you said that we were going to talk about demons today, I was so sure that you were going to like make this salacious episode about like skeletons in our closet or something, you know, like your childhood demons, because so many people online are like, these are two deeply damaged people. You know,
do they say that about us? Do they think that we are
haven't
deeply
dealt with our trauma, and this is why we want to have children, or why we're weird?
I love this. I mean, you want to talk about a sign of brainwashing or a brainwashed individual. It's when somebody disagrees with them or has a different world perspective than them.
So they're damaged.
Their first reaction is, what horrible thing happened to them in their past that made them see the world differently than me? And that what they need to do, and there's actually a class of people who do this. They don't even say like, you know, you should read the research or you should go out there and learn about this topic. They're like, you need to go to therapy.
Yes.
Then you will think like me.
Exactly. Well, it's like I think it's a constant trope that people are exposed to in media. Like villains, of course, were raised in terribly abused environments. Like, you know, that Dr. Evil bit where he's like, you know, he talks about this like terrible childhood and how he was beaten and all these things.
Well, I mean, I think that you know, if you talk about, we talk about the super virus, right? The cult. And the way that it maintains its membership or recruits new members is through using psychologists. And we've talked about this in the video, Psychology Has Become a Cult. I think this is somebody who originally trained in psychology. The way that psychology is practiced now is not the way it was practiced even a decade ago in terms of what's considered acceptable and what's not. And you know, as to what you're saying here, it makes a lot of sense. If you see this not as being in like one cultural group versus another cultural group, but see it as being in a cult, well, yeah, of course a cult would tell you, well, you need to go to your cult appointed mind cleaner. They'll clean your brains dirty, and there's these people you can pay to clean it. They'll wash it for you, if you will. And then once you have a clean brain, you can have clean thoughts.
On rewatching this during editing, I realized the joke may not be clear here. I am making a joke about brainwashing.
I don't think there's a precedent for that, though. Like, even in the media tropes where, like, the evil person has gone to therapy and worked on themselves, like, they're never really fixed. So it's just kind of this excuse to write someone off permanently. That they're damaged, they're traumatized, and, you know, though they should go to therapy and whatnot, no amount of it will actually.
I mean, I saw so much of this was Trump when he was elected.
Did people say he was traumatized in his youth?
Yeah, all of these articles.
Oh, they did. They something about his dad, right? That he was.
It was, how is he traumatized? How is he?
Right.
You know, they just cannot fathom that someone could honestly just disagree with their perspective.
They must be emotionally stunted.
Now, well, let's be clear. Other cultural groups have some similar things to this. Like there are some.
Like maybe you're possessed by a demon, for example.
Some extreme Christians that like literally think everyone who disagrees with them is possessed by a demon.
So there's that.
But I would say that those are like the most extreme, absolutely wackadoo of Christians. And yet this is a mainstream position among those indoctrinated into the virus.
Yeah.
Actually, Scientology do the same thing. It's your thetans, right? Your thetans that are attached to you, which cause you to have negative thoughts and stuff like that. And you need to go to their well, their version of like psychologists, these
To be
people who you
cleaned.
tell your backstory to, and then they help you get your thetans off of you
Hmm.
so that you can think clearly because
Yeah.
of you. Oh, they even have something like, oh, what's it called?
But I know that also like they don't even want mothers to scream during childbirth because they think that might traumatize the child, which is, yeah, I guess it goes to show you can make up all these excuses of like whether or not the person remembers or not. Here's why they're messed up, like their mother screamed when they were born or something, right?
So the term they use, by the way, is clear. When
Clear,
you have got
right?
rid of
And
all
that's
your
why that
thetans,
documentary was called
thetans.
"Going Clear."
Yeah. So once they have cleared your brain,
Mhm.
cleaned it, washed it, if you will, whichever group. No, but it's just a common practice, and it makes sense that it's a common practice because it's an incredibly effective practice.
Yeah. Well, and other people I think just say like, well, it's because you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your savior, or basically you haven't converted to this religion and that's why you're evil, or
But
goodness
what I
knows.
would say, hold on, is that this practice, this
Mm.
way of relating to people who see the world differently from you, is not usually a practice had within healthy cultural groups. If we look within the healthy Christian cultural groups or Jewish Orthodox groups, or even in a historic context, they
Yeah.
typically do not see their enemies in like if you just go see like our whatever their iteration of a psychologist was, you'll eventually be able to see things the way I do.
Of
But
course.
where this is relevant to today's topic of conversation is one thing that I do think that most successful cultural traditions have, and that ours, as we had originally constructed it, we've built a little religion for our family, complete with holidays, belief systems, and metaphysical structure for the universe that we'd pass on to our kids, does not have, which is demons, like some sort of like genuinely malevolent force. And
Mm.
so we started thinking about how we could, because one thing I really want with everything in this religion as I pass it to my kids is that it is not falsifiable by any sort of science as it exists right now, and where it is falsifiable by science, it can be updated. Like, it is meant to work. Why we call it a secular religious structure is it is meant to be our best understanding from a secular perspective of how the world actually works.
So it's kind of like hard science fiction, where hard science fiction is expected to be logically internally consistent with any invented science, and it's all supposed to respect any science that already exists. Like, don't get a planet's orbit wrong, don't get the physics of this wrong,
Yeah.
etc.
So to start, for people who aren't familiar with the broad strokes of our ideological belief system, it's that in 100,000 years from today, a million years from today, if our descendants are still around, that they would be closer to the way we would conceive of a deity today or a god today than the way we would conceive of another human. And as such, who's to say they relate to time the same way we do, and they might be guiding their manifestation, which is why we call it, the inevitable God, the self-manifesting God, through rewarding individuals who do things that increase the quality or lead to a flourishing future human civilization, and punish humans who act indulgently or indolently or selfishly or on vanity or on self-narratives. And so, for example, one of the things that we tell our kids is that these these beings that influence the past, they don't necessarily come in like angels or something like that. They may be just manipulating things at the smallest, most quantum level in a way that has like a butterfly effect that then ends up having large repercussions in even potentially like human evolution. So an example I could give here is one of the ways in which they have sort of encoded in our own biology punishment for indolence is that all hedonistic pursuits where an individual is pursuing happiness or vanity or their perception in other people's eyes for its own sake, just sort of masturbating these emotional subsets, that these pleasures turn to ash on one's tongue. What I mean by that is the pleasure that you experience for going out and chasing pleasure, like going out, just sleeping with tons of people, going out, just, eating really, really fancy food every day, drinking whenever you want. All of these begin to feel like they lose any happiness that they give you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And they begin to feel gross, and they make you feel gross as a human being. Now,
And what
maybe
we
not
like
all
about this is
humans.
that for kids, this is really, really easy to point out. So like, let's say that your kid is really into a sports star or a movie star. And you like it's pretty easy on most famous people to dig up, here are the ways that people like them or people on their same trajectories or even just them are actually pretty miserable. People who especially pursue fame just for hedonism do end up like extra miserable. And it's like hedonism on steroids. Like it's one thing to just pursue a life that's kind of comfortable where you have hobbies and you have your job and you retire early or whatever, and there's van life and all that. But like when you were like going all the way, like, no, I'm going to get all the attention, all the fame, all the money, all the mansions, all the cars, all the women, all the men, whatever, the misery seems to pile on like in proportion to the amount of hedonism pursued. And it's so cool.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I want to highlight our word, which you said a little differently, which is if you look at people who dedicated their lives to personal aggrandizement or personal vanity, whether those are sports stars who were doing it for personal reasons. So there's sort of two categories of like sports stars and movie stars. Some of them you can see they go into it, but then they are genuinely trying to make the world a better place rather than sort of make themselves look like the good guy or personally aggrandize themselves. And you see very different life outcomes from these two groups. When you see the sports stars who are in it for the fame and the movie stars who are in it for the fame and the sex and the drugs, or the musicians who are in it for that stuff, their lives often are the lives that I would least want to trade mine for. They have such a deep sense of genuine despair that you can see in almost all of their actions that it is almost heartbreaking. But you know that this is a self-working system. But what's very interesting is when we look at the people who have the most genuine and persistent happiness, these are the most mission-driven people. These are the people that have sacrificed their lives for their faith. And that faith can be a secular faith or a religious faith, but sacrificing your life for your faith. Now, some people are like, but isn't that what these, Hollywood stars that are pushing every single progressive talking point are? And I'd be like, no, it's the Hollywood stars that are sticking to the progressive talking points from 20 years ago that have radically changed, because they have radically changed. Like, what is an acceptable progressive talking point changes a lot faster than I think a lot of progressives are willing to admit themselves. And so you see different level. I can think of an example here. J.K. Rowling, for example, she seems to be a genuinely happy person who is still pushing the progressive talking points that were famous when she was a kid.
Yeah,
which
at great cost.
At great cost.
Yeah.
Now, I think she was wrong to believe those, but I think at least
she
it
held
shows
to
a
them.
level of integrity
And logical consistency.
Yeah, integrity and logical consistency that you don't see in the Hollywood stars. Like a perfect example of this would be like Harry and Meghan. Like whenever anything switches, whenever the winds blow in a particular way, they're on the new train because what they care about is being seen as good guys, not the causes themselves. What they care about is the brand.
He's right. Trying to make ourselves into a brand just turned us into products. We don't need to be a brand, do we? Yes, I'm sure you agree, darling. We can be the people we talked about being, with no more worries about how we look or the image we project to people. What matters is what we have on the inside.
Yeah.
So this is a brilliant little thing that has an aspect of religiosity to it, in me telling my kids about this, like this idea of happiness turning to ash in one's mouth, that this being the way that we are designed, but it also has a level of truth to it and something I can point to, but it's also a lesson I want my kids to learn because I think it's a very important lesson that takes a lot of people too long to learn. I hate Jim Carrey's politics and everything like that, but I do love the one quote that he has. And I think he's an example of a deeply unhappy person who achieved everything and then just tried to go, like, never really thought about why he was doing stuff. But I hope that everyone, has the blessings to achieve everything they ever wanted to achieve in life so that they can know that it wasn't what they wanted. Which is no, I mean, it's if that's the type of stuff you want to achieve.
I am two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. And when I dream, I don't just dream any old dream. No, sir. I dream about being three-time Golden Globe winning actor Jim Carrey, because then I would be enough. It would finally be true, and I could stop this terrible search.
You want to see a genuinely happy person, and this is why I'll often play clips of him like on other Base Camp episodes. Steve Irwin.
What good is a fast car, a flash house, and a gold-plated dunny to me? Absolutely no good at all. I've been put on this planet to protect wildlife and wilderness areas, which in essence is going to help humanity. I want to save the world. And you know, money's great. I can't get enough money. And you know what I'm going to do with it? I'm going to buy wilderness areas with it. Every single cent I get goes straight into conservation. And guess what, Charles? I don't give a rip whose money it is, mate. I'll use it and I'll spend it on buying land.
Like, watch anything with him in it, the way he relates to his family, the way, like, just genuinely, like, pure, good-hearted happiness.
Is there anything in this world that would want to make me give away what I'm doing now? Yes. Yes, there is. When my children can take the football that I call wildlife conservation and run it up. When they're ready to run up our mission, I will gladly step aside. And I guarantee you it'll be the proudest moment of my life. And my job will be done like my mum and my dad. Then and only then will I know that I have achieved my ultimate goal.
And that is really interesting that you can see this when somebody who has dedicated themselves to a higher calling. And that's what I talk about. Like, he definitely had a secular higher calling. Like, his higher calling was preserving the environment, right?
And it doesn't have to be like a higher calling that we approve of. Like, when I was trying to think, when we first talked about this, of celebrities who are super, super famous and successful, but also they seem really happy, I thought of Bill Murray, and like, probably his objective function is not something that we would choose for ourselves, but he's very consistent in his action, and like both publicly and privately. And he, seems really happy.
Karen Michael drove more than 300 miles from her home outside Chicago to the ballpark in Cleveland. Karen didn't have a ticket for the game, but she went anyway on the zillion-to-1 chance she could buy one at the stadium.
I was at the will call window hoping that somebody didn't pick up their tickets and I would be able to rebuy them. And they don't do that.
Murray was passing by and saw Karen being turned away, heartbroken.
And he turned around, gave me the ticket, shuffled me in the door. I was ecstatic to even be going into the game, let alone actually sitting with him.
Roker also showed this goofy video of Murray playing hairdresser with another fan.
And he just starts styling her hair.
So,
well, and it doesn't seem to me that this is ever about fame or hedonism for him.
No, he's just a cool guy.
But anyway, so back to the talking point, demons, right? So what is a demon within this context? Like, where can I borrow themes around what demons look like? And Simone, you had a really interesting idea.
Yeah, can I share my idea of demons? What I think they are actually in our metaphysical world is, so we have the future police, which are essentially like our religion's equivalent of angels, because we often say, when something happens and you don't know why, or it seems bad at the time, we're like, listen, the future police made this happen because it was supposed to happen. And if we are on a righteous path, essentially, it is going to be for the best. And we found in our lives that whenever something seemingly terrible happens, it actually is for the best. And we thank the future police for that. So they are, in that sense, to us, a guardian angel. But I think that they can equally be demons, and that the same future police that are nudging your life in a positive direction can be the same demons that nudge your life in a terrible direction, toward death, toward ruin, toward obsolescence, because you are not, to use a Calvinist term, among the elect. And a sign that demons are punishing you, that the future police are punishing rather than rewarding you, is that you are pursuing a life of hedonism. And so you are going to be increasingly punished by them, made obsolete, made miserable, made, have your life cut short, etc.
Yeah.
And I think it's the most, per our worldview, logically consistent view. And it's also simple and elegant, because the same people who reward can also punish. Well, more like the Krampus version of Santa Claus.
Well, so I like this idea of the same entity that is rewarding, or group of entities that is rewarding actions that increase the potential flourishing of the human race, do lay tests and trials for us intentionally. They lay temptation.
They would need to remove the non-meaningful people. They would need to take out the ones who might cause damage, right? Who might not create the future that needs to happen.
Yes, well, to abandon those that succumb to the temptation and the tests that they have laid out to them.
And not just abandon, but cull, but neutralize.
Yeah, and I think if you see historically, one of the things we did when we were looking at raising our kids is going through historic figures that ended up moving human civilization
Mm.
on a direction that we think was better. And we're like, what do they have in common? Like, if we're thinking about raising our kids to be great people, like we do believe in the great people theory of history, and I do want my kids to be great people. I do want to become one myself in great person history, right? That'd be amazing if that happens. But one of the things that you just see consistently is in their youth, they underwent some form of enormous trial or some form of enormous undeserved hardship, often. Not always undeserved, but you just see this over and over and over again. You saw it in the recent Elon Musk book, whether it's Caesar and the Pirates, whether it's, there's always stuff like this, right? And I love this as a mechanism, because if the future police were guiding all of these individuals as well, they had to put them through these trials so that they could know, and they had to give them the temptations so that they could ensure that they deserved their blessings and their guidance to the future that must come to pass. But this is also very different than most religion structure of demons.
One interesting way that some religious or cultural views don't do demons, but still do chaotic forces, which I would say is probably closer to future police, is with the tricksters that you'll see like in many Native American traditions.
Yeah,
For
but I
example.
just don't know if we believe in tricksters.
Yeah, but I think tricksters are interesting in that, to your point that like, oh, all these religions have demons. I wouldn't say that demons are universal or that everyone
No.
chooses to
But what I
cast
say
blame.
is pretty odd for a religious structure is a religious structure that believes that both the entities acting negatively in your life and the entities acting positively in your life are the same entity.
Oh, I don't know. The Greek and Roman gods seemed to be that, right? Sometimes they would be complete dicks to you, and sometimes they would be pretty
I'd say it's
cool.
closer to like the Christian God, where the
Yeah.
negative things that befall someone are often God as well as the
He was
positive things.
sometimes really mean.
Well, I mean, this isn't true of all iterations of Christianity, but it is
Yeah.
definitely true of some. But he
Yeah.
often doesn't, or at least in the iterations that I'm familiar with, use angels to perform the negative acts. He instead uses the angels to sort of give demons or devils permission to perform negative acts. Is often literature around the Bible. The actual Bible itself often goes very rarely into this sort of stuff, so it's not.
Yeah, I don't recall anything about angels or demons in the Bible. I just recall, for example, Satan like goading God into making Job's life miserable. I'm not even tempting, just being like, you really think Job thinks you're great?
Yeah. But anyway, so back to demons
our
in our
demons.
structure, right?
Yes.
So another thing that I really like, and it's funny, we in our book we said one of the names for the deity that we call God, as we call it, is the Omniscion, the all child,
The
basically.
inevitable God.
But obviously, or the inevitable God that we tied from obviously we took some inspiration from the Warhammer universe from that, just because I love it. It's fun, right? Good lore. One of the best lores, actually. But I was also sort of thinking of it in terms of a lore structure. And I really like its lore structure around the types or sort of the domains of demons. With the 4 core domains of demons. And what I like about this is in terms of teaching my children how to resist the core temptations and the faces that the enemy, when these future police are acting adversarial to you, when they are testing you, they do that through enemy agents, through empowering individuals, real humans often, or social movements or events in your life that you can call the enemy, to test you, to pull you off the path of righteousness. And that the enemy, what I like about the Warhammer framing here is you can use the 4 chaos gods as the faces that the enemy uses and the avatar the enemy uses to pull you from your path, right? And it will do this with fallen individuals. It'll take somebody who's already fallen, often succumb to some form of ideological virus, and then puppet that individual, often as part of the virus's reproductive cycle, to try to peel you off from the path of righteousness. So if I'm going to go through the 4 deities in the Warhammer universe and sort of see how I see them represented here, which is interesting because I just find them much more compelling than more traditional deities I'm familiar with from other demons I'm familiar with from other religious structures. The reason why I think that they're more compelling is because they were sort of come to a priori from an authorial standpoint instead of being so historically. If you look at like Christianity, what Christianity would often do is frame the gods of neighboring religions as demons or as Satan. You know, like Moloch, right, was a neighboring religion during early Judaism, right? So, and words for demon and stuff like that, or Baal was a neighboring deity, right? Which means that they would often take a lot of the iconography from that instead of coming up with the iconography a priori. Now, of course, if you're taking this from our weird religious perspective, we would say that these are not actual a priori, but these are visions of the way that you might be tested that are easy for a child to conceive of, right? So the four core deities born by four core human sources of temptation or fear or negative emotions. The first we would say is Nurgle, which in the universe is sort of the deity of pestilence, which is born by humans' fear of death and desire to keep living through anything. And the gifts that it gives to people who follow it most are the alleviation of pain associated with death and stuff like that, like diseases, etc. Simone, what group would be most associated with a paralyzing fear of death leading them to stagnation?
Our longtime enemy, the life extensionists.
Yes. They're the Nurgleite community. And well, I mean, I like that because I think it's really true. It can be seen as a positive ideology, and there's so many ways to cover up the intrinsic stagnation embodied within perpetual life and the intrinsic dehumanization of shorter lived entities and everything like that. Whereas I think seeing it through this eye can make it a lot easier to understand the true. And what I also love is the correlation between stagnation and pestilence. That it is in stagnant pools that parasites breed most fervently, that then take down great beasts.
I see.
Then second, you could say the most common would be Slaanesh. And what I like about Slaanesh is all forms of hedonism, right? Not just sexual hedonism, but personal vanity, a strive for perfection. So someone would be a servant of Slaanesh or a tempter of Slaanesh, whether they are a gem bro who is indolently working on their body to the exclusion of potentially efficacious action in reality, or somebody who just spends all day having sex or on OnlyFans or eating food constantly like a glutton. And what I really like about this demonic framing is it helps remind people how little of a difference there is between pursuits of personal vanity and the pursuit of being validated by your community, which can be a really driving ideology for a lot of people, right? It's very easy to convince somebody that this is a thing of value because they're like, I am striving for human perfection, right? But it is human perfection that serves no greater purpose other than the glorification of the self. And this really came up with a family member of mine where he was annoyed at me. So a lot of my family, people might be surprised to know this, are like very deep South, good old boy type people, Texas groups. And this is somebody who married into the family. So not directly related to me, but it's the type of people my family often marry. That I said that sports was a sin. And he was like, no, sports is not a sin. Sports is great. Sports is tradition. And I'm like, what? Yeah, but how does it make the world a better place? And I go, and they're like, well, you can't just say sports is a sin because from your framework. I'm like, there is no logically consistent framework. I stand all logically consistent frameworks that lead to a better future for humanity and that are pluralistic, right? That are okay with people different from them existing. And none of them that I am aware of have like a logically consistent way. I can think of no iteration of Christianity that's like really a well thought through iteration where God's like, oh yeah, you get into heaven because you did really well on that one play, because you had all of those fans, because you helped carry your team to victory.
And to be clear, this is not to say that any engagement in sports is seen as a bad thing by us. It's sports as an inherent good that you disagree with.
Yeah, well, and as a life pursuit that I disagree with.
Right.
So I would say that, and this is where we'll get to one of the other demons, one of the easiest paths to temptation, and one of the easiest ways a person can fall off the righteous path, is to not recognize that as a human, they are wretched and they are flawed and they are failed. And that is okay. All humans sin. What is critical is that you do not glorify the sin. What I mean by this is every human does some things that are just for them. Whether it's sports, whether it's working out a little bit more than they have to, whether it's drinking, a sin that I engage in, right? Whether it's, indulgent spending on things that they don't really need, right?
My sin.
Yeah, sin is a part of life. But there is a huge difference between saying, I am engaging in this sin. I recognize it as sin. I recognize it is something I should have some shame for. But I also recognize that I am human and thus a sinner, right? But if you then say, no, actually the sports are a good thing. I am a good person for being good at sports. I am a good person for in whatever particular aspect of Slaaneshdom that I engage in. That is where true evil comes from. But true evil can also come from a human that thinks they can totally avoid sin. Every group I know of believes that humans can completely avoid sin. The humans in their group that quote unquote come closest to that are typically least efficacious individuals in society, because avoiding sin means avoiding action.
Yeah. So sorry, I think you cut out for a second. You were saying that those who believe you can completely avoid sin and who tried to do so also do the least of anything because they're most likely to just not do anything.
Yes.
Right.
So there is just as much sin in believing that sin is virtue as there is sin in believing that it is capable that you as a human, a current iteration of humanity, can escape sin. So, but anyway, so that's one path there. It's Slaaneshdom. And what I really like about Slaaneshdom as a framing device is that it frames all of these various types of hedonistic and self-validation temptations alongside each other and as equally evil, because I believe they hurt people in the same way.
Yeah.
But they're very different than something like the life extensionist, like the desire to not die. This is usually an ideological, not like in the moment desire. Next demon or life path would be Khorne, the demon of war.
How do we spell this?
Aggression. Well, and Simone knows when world conflicts erupt, I'm often like, well, Simone, should I go there? Should I be trying to do something about this? And she's like, no, Malcolm, this really isn't the best use. But I feel a really strong desire to get involved when I see, and my family, I remember one of the things that my grandfather told me before I was passing, who had, served in World War II, is that you are going to have like a really strong desire to engage in wars that you see as righteous, but just remember that it is always best to try to avoid the conflict, because you, as somebody who hasn't been to war, don't know how bad it really is, and that you can't imagine how bad it really is. And so I think that this desire for my team versus their team, where it leads to death and setback, is sort of Khornite failure, which is also very different from the Slaaneshi camp of failures, from life extensionist camp of failures. And the final one, which is the most interesting one to me, is Tzeentchian failure. This would be the god of change, right? The chaos demon of change. And that within the setting, this is the demon that empowers sorcerers and stuff like that, like anyone with any sort of magical power, or intellectuals or academics. But it is change just for the sake of change, not change for the sake of improving the human condition.
So
or
who does this? Because generally
flourishing.
humans hate change.
I would say that the core avatar of this right now would be the people who are just completely unhinged about AI, and that the people who call other people things like carbon fascists. that
I
literally
call other people carbon fascists, so I'm subject to this. but-
yes, you are. This is definitely the temptation that we are the most susceptible to.
Mm,
No, I mean it's true, Simone.
Yeah.
The idea of individuals. Now, I do believe that humans will need to change in the future, and I think that the drive to not change is a Nurgleite change. And Nurgle and Tzeentch are core. They hate each other a lot.
they're two ends
they
of a toxic spectrum.
they're two sides of a toxic spectrum where there is complete stagnation, but then there is change only for the sake of change. And that where I think you can corely define an individual that has succumbed to Tzeentchianism versus an individual that hasn't is, do they want some iteration of humanity to survive? Or are they okay with humanity being wholly and completely replaced? Or are they indifferent to humanity being wholly and completely replaced in the pursuit of whatever other thing that they're trying to achieve, often knowledge work or creating, the perfect AI or something like that?
Mhm.
I would argue that this is a force that in our world right now is the weakest of the four demonic forces, and therefore, we tend towards it a little bit, but only to sort of even out the great game, you could call it, between these four forces and the different people who will wear these forces and be puppeted by these forces in trying to seduce you off the path of righteousness, which is towards a pluralistic human empire.
Hmm. Interesting.
We're the descendants of humans because, of course, any entity that's around for hundreds of thousands of years is going to speciate to some extent. And so we want a human zoo, right? The collection. I mean, especially when humans get to other planets or are on floating, ship structures that take thousands of years to get between, you're just much intermigration indelibly lead to speciation. Unless you have some sort of like genetic protection act on, which is culling humans that deviate too much, which you could do, but it would require the sort of, ironically, a polygenic risk score IVF selection of the type that we do, but
Mhm.
that selects towards reversion to the mean.
Huh. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you know probably more Warhammer lore than most people who own at least one Warhammer figurine, and you are not among those people, by the way.
Oh, you say that, and then some people are going to be criticizing my knowledge of the lore in this video, being like, you got this wrong, or you got this wrong.
For someone who doesn't own a single figurine, I think you still
So
get
I
credit.
really love lore research, okay? It's one of my deepest hobbies where I will just go
Hours.
deep into the lore
Hours.
of a fictional universe. The two best fictional universes for lore, I think, are the old World of Darkness.
Is this a vampire thing that you
Yeah,
talked?
this is the
Okay,
Vampire the
okay.
Masquerade,
Okay.
but the original Vampire the Masquerade, not the new one. They really destroyed it when they made
You
like
nerd.
well, I think that the anyway, yeah. So I think they destroyed it with the New World of Darkness. I don't like the new, like, was Malkavians being a disease instead of a distinct clan?
How
Like, that's so
dare.
stupid. How dare you? Sorry, Simone. This bothers me.
I know, and I'm not above this level of nerddom.
And Gehenna, like, is
great.
too underway at this point. Was in the New World of Darkness. So anyway, but then was the Warhammer lore. The reason I always liked it, and one of the reasons I like it, I do think it's the logical conclusion. Just to like go on a tangent here that is not tied to the topic of this video, of a lot of hippie mindsets. So a lot of hippies, they'll come to me and they'll say things like, I remember this growing up, right? Like, well, what if deities are created by humans believing in them? Right. And then those deities really come to exist. And you mentioned a book,
a very Neil American gods kind of view.
Yeah. Well, Warhammer says, okay, this is true, and that is the worst of all possible worlds, because if that was true, then it is the most simple emotions, like the fear of death or pleasure for pleasure's sake, or etc., that would manifest the most as these deities. And as soon as these deities could act on the world, then they would have a manifest interest in increasing the emotion that leads to their creation. So like the god associated with fearing death would also try to spread pestilence and diseases, because that causes more people to fear death, which causes its power to grow.
Right.
And that this leads to horror beyond horror, horror beyond comprehension. And then you get a vast interstellar human empire, and you need to like monitor everyone's emotions and live in this extremely, even more than us, puritanical perspective where you sort of have to beat emotions out of individuals because
Unless you create some terrifying god.
yeah. But it's interesting that our world perspective is not that dissimilar from that. I mean, as we say, all positive and negative emotions are sin in that they are intrinsically indulgent, and that the righteous path for humanity is one in which we learn and master emotional self-control rather than to allow our emotions to control us, as I think is the calling card of many soft cultural traditions.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Fun
love you,
stuff.
and I love that you're okay with me being a stinking nerd.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Malcolm. You're the best.
You are the best. You are the best. And I loved the thesis you came up with of the demons and the gods being two faces of the same entities, because it rings so true for me. It rings so plausible for me. It requires the smallest additional stuff, but it also allows us to prime our kids and to frame for our kids the people who come to them with these temptations, that this is a test, and these individuals are just human puppets of failed human creatures that are testing them.
Yes, it's going to be fun. Can't wait to try it out.
Love you. Yeah,
Love you
can't wait
too.
to try terrifying our kids.